I'm going to talk from an organisational point of view and a personal point of view. I work as the director for the Inner City Health Program at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. And you'll see our building there on the left. We've called that the O'Brien Centre for Urban Health. I noted some of the ideas about taking mental health out of health. I think that's I think that's a philosophical question in many ways. The question is, how can you address people's needs, and what's the best way of doing that? So those of you that know Sydney will know the Sydney Opera House. Yeah. If you look up on the hill there, that's our catchment area. And it goes across to Bondi Beach, which of course is a very well-known beach. It's iconic, really. And it looks also wonderful. And I can assure you that it is, for most people. But there's another story in Sydney, and this is our catchment area. So we work in inner city Sydney, in the just up from the King's Cross, which is really the red light area. And these are actual pictures that have been taken of the area and the people that live there. So this is the catchment area itself. Again, you'll see the Sydney Opera House up here, and it looks down through the catchment area. So St Vincent's catchment area is, of course, the area that serves the CBD, but it also is important because it's got the richest socioeconomic groups in that area, and also the very poorest. It's a place where there are casinos and entertainment precincts, there are red light areas, and then there's a whole range of housing, from housing for yuppies, through to hostels for the homeless. This person here is important. This is Trish. She lived for 25 years on the streets. And our homeless health team engaged with her over a period of time. It took a long time. She's very mistrustful, but was eventually able to identify who her family were. They made contact with the family, we flew them in from across the country. Western Australia takes 3 hours to get to Sydney. And she's now living in her own house. The happiest day of her life was buying her own television. So change is possible, even in the most demanding areas. This takes you a little bit more into the demography of City of Sydney. I won't go through this in any great detail, but it is quite interesting because, as you'll see, it's a continually growing area, and the houses are going up. 30% of people are actually born overseas. They speak their English as their second language, and there's the highest concentration of homeless in Australia. And then of the immigrants, a large number of those people come from East and Southeast Asia, Chinese, Indonesian, Korean, and, well, actually the Greeks, of course, don't come from Asia. But the Greeks and Italians form also a large percentage of people. There's actually quite a small number, relatively speaking, of Indigenous people, much less than the Australian population. The average age, believe it or not, is 32. So this is a very young population. There's a few other items on the slide there, but I think it must be Open Office that hasn't picked those up. So when we start to think about what are the services that we should provide, we haven't had an increase in our funding, by the way, apart from a brief stay unit that's co-located with the ED for 12 years. So whenever we think about how are we going to develop services, and we need to think of ways of reapplying the money that we already have. And of course there's some challenges about that. So when we want to develop a service that has more peer support workers in it, we'll have to get rid of some nurses or some doctors. The service, and I'll come to this in more detail in just a minute, is really focused on vulnerable populations. And those, of course, are the populations at risk, the addicted, the people with mental illnesses, people with intellectual disabilities and the like. But it also includes, and people, someone made a reference to it today, about loneliness and isolation. That's a major challenge within the inner city, as you can imagine. And of course there's quite an industry, a sex industry in the inner city as well, and those people have huge needs. We try to think more systematically about risk factors. Again, they haven't all appeared on the slide, but that kind of gives you a flavour of the way that we want to think about things. So when I came into the service in 2005, I'm a psychiatrist. I was the director for the mental health service. Now that we have the inner city health program, we have to think much more broadly in population terms about the needs of the population. And you know what? It's absolutely liberating not to just think in terms of mental illness. To be able to think much more about what a person's needs are is absolutely critical, I believe, in terms of the way forward. And I don't know whether that's something that you will be able to align with, but I think that this is actually the future. So the Inner City Health Program is actually based on the Inner City Health Program at St Michael's Hospital in Toronto. And what we're trying to do is to provide a total health care and actually a social service program for vulnerable populations living in inner city Sydney. So the program actually includes mental health, drug and alcohol, services for the homeless, and also general health and primary health care liaison services. What we aim to do is to take much more of a population-based approach to the needs of people within the inner city. And we think of it in terms of reducing barriers to health and well-being for high-risk and priority populations. In order to do that, not only do we have to provide good services, but we have to think about the social and economic determinants of health that affect people living in urban environments in particular. But of course that whole field is informed by a lot of evidence in terms of public health. So in effect, this is kind of like turning mental health services totally on its head and not just thinking about this illness or this person's symptoms, let alone their disability, but trying to think about them as people living within an environment with their families and with their communities. So it's really saying the same sort of thing that's been said by others today, but hopefully taking a slightly different slant on it. And the final thing, of course, is to provide an integrated continuum of primary and tertiary care and community outreach to these populations. I just put this on again, some of the slide is missed, because our strategy, and almost deliberately, is lined up with the City of Sydney, that's the local council's health and wellbeing strategy. And so the ones with the asterisks are the areas where we overlap more directly with their strategy. I'm not sure how well this has come out, but this kind of gives you the array of services that we now provide. And we only see ourselves as part of the total array of services that people have access to. And if you want to define it, it's probably more in the area of clinical specialist services. But because we have a recovery orientation, we don't see ourselves as the hub. The hub is actually out in the community. We simply provide support for those services that are supporting the ultimate recovery of consumers. it's a very busy service. We have each month coming through the emergency department and through our acute care community team around 350 presentations to mental health. There's an additional number of people that have primary alcohol and drug problems. We have around 120 admissions to our inpatient unit. The PEC is that brief stay unit that's co-located with the emergency department. So there's a total of 33 beds. And then we have another 112 admissions through our social detox unit. There's around 5,000 presentations per year, which accounts for about 12% of the ED presentations, which compares with other EDs in Australia of around 3 to 5%. So we account for a large part of the business in terms of the ED. I won't actually take you through the figures. Maybe I just get on to talking about some of the challenges that we have. We are dealing with a high volume of presentations, including 60% of the people that come to the ED come from out of our area. As our services have improved over recent years, the ambulance and police tell us they bring people to us preferentially. So, in a sense, we're kind of victims of our own success. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, the sisters, and we are part of a Catholic organisation, their mission is actually to accept everybody that comes to the doors. So we never turn anybody away. But it creates a problem in terms of how do we manage that demand. There are issues of safety. There have been a couple of incidents, unfortunately, in the emergency department and in the community mental health service of a couple of people actually taking out a box cutter and cutting their throat in front of the workers. But by and large, those are rare incidents, but it gives you an idea about where the end of the spectrum is at the very least. Both of those people survived, by the way. So what we're trying to focus on, though, in this very busy, very high acuity environment, is how do we keep person-focused and recovery-oriented? And I take it as an article of faith that we can do that, we can achieve that. And I guess I'd just like to pay a tribute to the people that have formed the International Mental Health Collaborating Network, because it goes back, a lot of my orientation has been developed by people in that network. And John actually helped me, gosh, it must be about 20 years ago or so now, John, 22 years ago, to close a couple of psychiatric hospitals in Auckland when I was the director in the Auckland services. And we developed a whole network of community services. And then the experience of Trieste and also the experience of NGOs as they developed in New Zealand, like the ones run by Rob Warrener. And more recently, the involvement of people like Ron Coleman and Karen have really helped keep us focused. And it's very hard because it's very easy to shift back into symptoms and diagnosis in the kind of environment that we work in. We certainly focus a lot on patient throughput. But we do want to promote social inclusion. So I might actually cut this short, but we are looking at continuing change. There's no destination in all of this. It's more a matter about the quality of the process that and the values that you have in terms of treading the path to the recovery, not just of service users and their families, but also of services and the workers within them as well. So it should be recovery in the fullest sense of the word. So the first thing that we are trying to do is we want to adopt a strengths-based, recovery-oriented system of care right throughout the services. Ron's come to us on a couple of occasions, and he's kind of given us a measure on a graph of where we're at in that process. But in order to do that, what we've got to do is to improve the assessment, treatment and consultation liaison services, and to better develop integrated care. We're also taking a focus, extending our focus to look at what is the general healthcare needs of the people we see through our services. And yeah, it doesn't quite let me get there. But the approach has to be a total one. Now, when we talk about improving strengths-based recovery, there's a whole range of things that we can do. I'm very impressed by what we've heard today. It reflects a lot of what we're trying to do. We are moving towards a system of employing peer support workers. But there are a range of things that we're doing also for Indigenous populations as well, with their specific needs in mind. And I think I'll finish on this slide, but there are some more specific things around how we want to improve our acute care. We want to change our notion of acute care, so that on the team you don't just have clinicians, you have NGO workers and you have peer support workers as well. I think in the interests of time, I'll finish with that. I won't go into the details. One of the things that we are particularly proud of is the Cadre project, which is down the bottom. That's being conducted on one of the housing estates. And so we've started to a process of consumer-led mental health first aid teaching and peer support as well. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.